You know, I still don't get it. Are calendars expensive where Brandon lives or something? Or did the world end in the universe where Brandon lives, and as such, he's stuck in time? Once every so often, you'll come across a video about the prequels that is oblivious to all the discussion about the films that has existed since 2012. And it's embarrassing to see how out of touch Brandon is with the films. Brandon's Attack of the Clones video still has all the hallmarks of a mindless 2012 jab at the prequels. I like to think that as stupid as prequel hate was, everyone is aware of prequel resurgence at the very least. Not Brandon McNulty, and that's what makes these kind of videos, as rare as they pop up in this day and age, extra hard to watch. Because it's like watching an outdated time capsule, more or less. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Get ready, because today we're going to talk about 3 writing-related mistakes that killed Attack of the Clones.
I didn't realize that Attack of the Clones was dead. I don't think anybody did. At least he's not whining about bad dialogue as quickly as Jar Jar in his Phantom Menace video.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm haunted by the dialogue that George Lucas never should have given Anakin.
And there we go. Now, just for the record, this video is somewhat slightly better than his Phantom Menace video, because he at least addresses the bare minimum at some point, or at least half of it, which we'll get into. Still, I hate when people point to this scene and go on about Shakespeare and how Anakin's dialogue sounds unnatural, blah blah blah. They have to cite a scene which is awkward by design, topped with the way it's lighted and shot, with Padme dressing all fancy around Anakin. And as someone who picked up on these details from the very beginning, it's kind of crazy that people miss the trick. Especially this guy who still thinks Barack Obama is still the president. We're 2.5 presidents ahead of Obama now.
I'm also haunted by some other glaring issues in Attack of the Clones, and today we're going to look at 3 of them and how they hurt the story.
I am sweating like a pig.
But first, I want to say something positive about this movie. Unlike Episode 1, which is a dumpster fire from start to finish,
screw you.
Episode 2 is legitimately entertaining at times. The last 45 minutes especially are a blast, and they actually feel like Star Wars.
I'd like you to define what feels like Star Wars. Why does The Phantom Menace not qualify as Star Wars, despite being made by the same guy as Star Wars in its purest form? When I criticize the sequels, I mostly go after them for being a pale imitation of pure Star Wars, and state that they miss the point of Star Wars in countless ways. And going over the specific things they get wrong, cross-checking it with George Lucas, which is Star Wars in its purest form, is it not? If I had to guess, however, I feel like Brandon here is just complaining about a lack of spectacle. As if Attack of the Clones had a problem with its spectacle as they were building towards the climax where they threw everything at us.
Everything from the factory scene onward is pure fun, and I was shocked by how much I enjoyed rewatching these parts.
I'm starting to wonder whether this guy is actually a closeted prequel fan going with the mainstream of 13 years ago.
Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the first hour and a half. Though Episode 2 starts with a decent assassination plot, things turn rotten pretty quickly as some major issues take root.
I'm all ears to hear what's wrong. Allegedly.
The first mistake is bad dialogue.
Ha! I should have guessed.
People nail this movie for its dialogue, and it's a well-deserved criticism.
When it comes to the dialogue in general, most of the lines people rip on always relate to the romance scenes. I don't know about you, but that largely indicates that said people have a bias against Anakin. People think of him too often as this badass, all-powerful warlord, when he is anything but. If I had to identify the actual problem, it's that people have this idealized version of Anakin that didn't and never existed, and confuses awkwardness and social illiteracy for bad dialogue. When it comes to other scenes, like when Obi-Wan discovers the clone army, I tend to not hear any complaining whatsoever, at least in regards to the dialogue.
Characters speak like they're from a badly translated video game.
Oh yeah, overlay it with the "I don't like sand" monologue. Well, here's a hot take for you, Brandon. Anakin's right. Fuck sand. This monologue is awkward by design as well. I noticed that a lot of people either don't understand the context of what's being said, or they do, and they're upset that Anakin wasn't talking like a macho man. Why is it the citations of bad dialogue always come from the romance scenes where Anakin is being awkward and nervous? Well, guess what? Brandon McNulty does have an example that isn't from a romance scene whatsoever, but it's a pretty pathetic dissection.
And at times the dialogue is aggressively horrible. For example, remember that scene early on where Anakin and Obi-Wan chase an assassin into a bar?
Yeah, I do. The aesthetics were really good. And since it was done mostly practically, it makes you wonder why prequel haters don't like it. They're too scared to pay the movie a compliment.
Before they head inside, they discuss the situation, and just listen to how many times Anakin calls Obi-Wan Master before they enter.
She went into the club, Master. Sorry, Master. Yes, Master. Yes, Master. I try, Master.
Why do I get the feeling you're going to be the death of me?
Don't say that, Master.
That's your problem? That Anakin repeatedly refers to Obi-Wan as Master? You largely cut out what Obi-Wan says that causes Anakin to repeatedly call him Master. So I watched the copy of the film that I have on my PC, and Obi-Wan was literally nagging Anakin at every turn, telling him to use the Force and focus, telling him not to lose his lightsaber next time.
Patience. Use the Force. Think.
Sorry, Master.
You went in there to hide, not to run.
Yes, Master.
Next time, try not to lose it.
Yes, Master.
This weapon is your life.
I try, Master.
And the part that you showed, Obi-Wan foreshadowing his ultimate fate by saying, "Why do I get the feeling you will be the death of me?" which causes Anakin to respond in annoyance. That's why he keeps saying yes, Master, in various different ways. Obi-Wan has a new way of chastising Anakin every 2 seconds. So how is that bad dialogue? It's actually pretty good dialogue in my opinion. The two argue off of each other, and Anakin's constant annoyed replies to being chastised is actually pretty natural. This feels like a real conversation that a teacher would be giving their at times sloppy student. Hell, I remember my parents talking to me like that. When I don't clean up after myself, I get annoyed when I get barrage after barrage of pick this up or pick that up or stop being lazy and clean up after yourself.
Master, 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 master. Once is enough, twice is tolerable, but when you have characters talking like this, it draws attention to itself and takes us out of the story.
You didn't even try to assess the dialogue as it's presented. You just rip on George for having Anakin call Obi-Wan Master constantly. You pretty much showed only half of the dialogue as it's being spoken and ignored the other half, what Obi-Wan is saying. Again, the dialogue is actually unnaturally natural. And I say that because once you hear complaints about it being wooden or cardboard so often, you start expecting there to be cracks. But watching the scene for myself, I was amazed at just how stupid prequel haters are. I also don't understand how Anakin repeatedly saying Master at the end of every sentence is magically a deal breaker for the experience.
And you know what else takes us out of the story? Unrealistic conversations.
Yeah, let's see what your example of unrealistic dialogue is. Giving you strawmanned your first example, complaining about how Anakin repeated a word over and over.
And I get that the movie takes place in a galaxy far, far away, but in no universe should someone talk like Anakin does during the infamous fireside chat, or the I don't like sand speech, or pretty much any time he has a private exchange with Padme.
You know what I typically say in response to this, but I'll let Brandon finish his point, because I'm such a nice guy.
A lot of people try to apologize for Anakin's dialogue. They point out that he's socially awkward, that he had a troubled upbringing, that it's realistic for him to speak the way he does around Padme, but here's the problem. If Anakin's a socially awkward guy, there must be consequences for that awkwardness. Padme should either be turned off by the way he speaks, or she should call him out on it.
Yeah, I have to stop here because it's obvious you haven't seen the movie whatsoever. Do you not recall that Padme was taken aback by Anakin's first compliment out of nervousness? You can even see Obi-Wan almost cringe at what Anakin just said. Also, I want to take the moment to point out this part where Padme says she feels uncomfortable. What if I told you that she actually likes it, but she doesn't like that she liked it, if that makes sense? Both characters developed a clear attraction to each other in this movie from the get-go. I also have to point out that this argument Brandon's making is literally half-baked, because he's focusing on all this from Anakin's perspective, but never Padme's. Both characters are being taken out of their shell, Anakin has been trained as a warrior monk, and Padme has led a political life, and it has been forever since she actually had a crush on a boy. This is referenced in the movie, in that grass scene, which, speaking of, don't the characters literally do what you're asking them to do? Padme teases Anakin on the last boy she had a crush on, and Anakin does the same in regards to the discussion about politics. So there is literally playfulness, teasing, and sexual tension on all of this. Also another thing. Ultimately, Padme rejects the romance between herself and Anakin and only goes back on it when they're about to be executed in the Geonosian arena. And she's like, there's no point suppressing feelings now if we're about to die. Time to get hitched for real. When prequel haters describe the romance in Attack of the Clones, they incorrectly assert that Anakin never would have scored Padme, and again, I have to stress that both characters were attracted to each other from the get-go when they're reunited in 10 years. And contrary to what they say, there's actually a lot of sexual tension and conflict. Okay, so Brandon uses a right example for what George Lucas should have done, and it's pretty pathetic.
Better yet, she should tease him for it, create playful conflict, and build a rapport between the two characters.
That's literally what they were doing in the scene you overlaid, for Christ's sake.
Unfortunately, however, we don't get anything like that here. What we do get is him unloading these brutal speeches that Padme absorbs with total sincerity.
Yeah, I should also point out that Padme understands why Anakin is like this. In case you skipped The Phantom Menace, she saw Anakin's tragic upbringing firsthand, seeing his life in slavery on a dust bowl in the middle of nowhere. So when he's going on about how he doesn't like sand, that's why she's receptive to what he's saying. I also fail to understand how a rant about sand should be a deal breaker in universe. People rip on it for out-of-universe reasons, but what about in-universe? All Anakin is doing is talking about how he doesn't like sand. That's how you know the allegation of this being some of the worst dialogue in film history is completely overblown and exaggerated. I can guarantee it comes from a place of expecting Anakin to be a heroic version of how they saw Vader. But since Anakin's story is a cautionary tale and not an example you should follow, they ended up getting their misconception disputed and they hated the film for that reason. Very rarely do I find a prequel hater who comes off like they actually understand Star Wars on a basic level. And this is why I commonly insult people for being filthy casuals or not doing their homework.
Not only are these conversations uncomfortable to watch, but they fail to ring true.
The first half, I'm like, no shit. Having an awkward character is going to present awkward dialogue. Like for real. It sounds to me like we're on the same page as the two characters on screen if we feel uneasy. This is not a failure of the movie. It's a bona fide success actually, but people gotta spin it as bad. Like I thought the dialogue was hard to stomach too, but that wasn't a weakness of the movie, because in context, it should obviously be like that. Look at how the scene is lit and shot. And Anakin pours out his raw thoughts on Padme, as Padme herself looks resistant. How is this terrible? This is literally how I always experienced the movie as a kid. It's really strange how kids can mostly understand what George was going for, but a lot of Boba Fett pajama-wearing ass-clown adults can't. And I'm sorry, Brandon, but they do ring true. I think the real complaint is that Anakin isn't how you saw Vader, but on the light side.
Now compare that to Spider-Man 2. Remember when Peter's trying to win back Mary Jane and Dr. Octavius tells him to read poetry? Peter takes the advice, then he tries quoting a poem to MJ, and she shuts him right down.
Not only is your complaint not accurate in the slightest, but I don't think the two romance subplots here are similar enough to be validly compared. Peter Parker ultimately rejected Mary Jane at the end of the first movie when she poured her feelings for him out to the stars. And that's what Spider-Man 2 is built off of, the consequences of all that. Where Mary Jane is angry at Peter and is basically going to marry J. Jonah Jameson's son instead. In The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, however, it's a case of picking up where they left off 10 years ago. Except with the added fact that Padme now has feelings for Anakin now too, upon seeing how much he's grown. He ain't no kid no more. He's tall and strong and handsome, and you get the point. Spider-Man 2's romance was Mary Jane loving Peter, but also hating him at the same time. No such conflict exists for Anakin and Padme, and the only reason Padme cuts off the relationship, at least until her confession in the Geonosis arena, is because they could never be together conventionally. Padme is a senator entrenched in politics, and Anakin is a Jedi in training. But she ultimately gives into her feelings when she's about to die. Or at least it would have been if not for the namesake of the movie. Spider-Man 2, on the other hand, is about Mary Jane realizing that Peter is Spider-Man, and that he has a duty. Although by the end of the movie, they realize that their relationship, as well as Spider-Man existing, can coexist. It ties into the whole theme of with great power comes great responsibility, and the cost of responsibility. Yeah, I've assessed the story of the Raimi trilogy too. Don't be so surprised. Bottom line, these two romances are different, and trying to bring up Spider-Man 2 specifically is a false equivalence from both a thematic and contextual standpoint.
I've been reading poetry lately.
Whatever that means.
Day by day, he gazed upon her. Day by day, he sighed with passion. Day by day.
Don't start.
That's how you write an awkward character. You let them be awkward, then you punish the awkwardness in a realistic way.
Yeah, I'm sorry that the awkwardness wasn't played for jokes and that you didn't get a new Tobey Maguire meme out of it. I should mention that Peter being an out-of-touch nerd is commonly played for humor, but I don't even know if I would describe Anakin as an out-of-touch character. He's socially awkward, but he's better at reading a situation than Peter is, even if he struggles to get his thoughts out of the way.
Episode 2's second major mistake is poor pacing.
This is maybe the first time I've heard someone complain about the pacing specifically.
At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I love the final 45 minutes of Attack of the Clones. And those 45 minutes work because they do what they're supposed to do. They balance suspense, action, and character moments while driving the story toward its conclusion. In other words, they're well-paced.
Oh boy, let's see what you said about the preceding parts of the movie.
Unfortunately, however, the first hour and a half is not. Now, the opening act isn't too bad. You have Anakin and Obi-Wan trying to hunt down an assassin who gets killed by a bounty hunter. It kicks off the story with mystery, excitement, and character development, but from there, the pacing falls off a cliff.
Heresy!
This is when the story splits into two separate plot lines. In one plot line, Obi-Wan has to play detective and track down the bounty hunter, while in the other, Anakin has to act as Padme's bodyguard. The story then weaves these two plot lines together, and in theory, this should be like lighting two fuses and letting them suspensefully burn down until everything explodes toward the end. But here's the problem. Anakin's plotline lacks suspense. Why does it lack suspense? Well, first of all, it fails to put the characters in danger.
Isn't that the point? They go to Naboo so Padme will be safer. This is stated in the movie by Mace Windu. Also, why the hell do they need to be in physical danger all the time? The focus is clearly on the romance, and both characters are being taken out of their shells. That's the conflict for that segment of the movie.
You know how in Empire Strikes Back, Han and Leia are running for their lives and falling in love at the same time? Their storyline blends thriller and romantic elements in a way that keeps the audience engaged.
And what? You're not going to bring up what Luke's doing because that obviously destroys your whole point? Luke wasn't in any physical danger while training under Yoda, and Luke only gets involved in danger once he gets the vision of his friends suffering. In fact, you could almost draw a parallel with Attack of the Clones here, because it's not for a while until Anakin is given the visions of his mother dying that gets him back to Tatooine. Like seriously, it seems to me that The Empire Strikes Back and Attack of the Clones, both middle chapters in their respective trilogies, knew what they were doing with pacing and understood, unlike you, that it doesn't have to be direct physical danger all the goddamn time.
You have the urgency of the chase to make us worry for them, then you also have the romance to make us care more about them. The Han and Leia storyline alternates between excitement and romance, which keeps things fresh.
I was waiting for him to bring up Luke's subplot. Much to my disappointment, he doesn't mention it. Obi-Wan was the mystery part of the movie in Attack of the Clones, and Anakin was the personal journey of romance and whatnot. The same can be applied to The Empire Strikes Back, except it's the romance subplot that's action-packed. Let me tell you, I'm not even trying that hard to find holes in his arguments. I'm just using basic reasoning to tell you that he has an unfair bias towards the prequel trilogy.
Now, Anakin and Padme's plotline in Episode 2 doesn't do that. The characters are never in immediate danger, and the scenes themselves follow a safe, one-dimensional pattern.
For fuck's sake, why are you forgetting about Luke Skywalker?
Instead of balancing thriller and romantic elements, we get romance, 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 then Anakin has a conveniently timed vision of his mother's suffering.
Oh, fuck off. Conveniently timed my ass.
That abruptly shifts the story toward Tatooine.
Yeah, you clearly missed the scene where Padme shuts off the romance for reasons I mentioned earlier. There's a reason it's dropped, you know, and why it comes back later at a specific point.
And there, Anakin investigates his mother's disappearance, locates her, slaughters the Tusken Raiders, and returns home.
The way you're describing it, it sounds pretty eventful. What on earth about it qualifies as bad pacing?
Essentially, you have a bundle of romantic scenes followed by a bundle of rescue and revenge scenes. Rather than mixing them together in a compelling way, the script goes on a mission to make Anakin and Padme fall in love before going on a separate mission to make Anakin begin his journey toward the dark side.
I'm not going to repeat myself. Let's get on with it.
If you want a better way of telling this story, have Anakin and Padme get to Tatooine as soon as possible. Don't have them rolling around in a field and talking about her ex-boyfriend. Have them investigate his mother's disappearance while facing danger together, overcoming obstacles together, and grieving together.
Yeah, I'm glad that George didn't follow your rigid example. The whole film doesn't have to be in constant physical danger. It can have downtime. Like, come on. I could literally cite over a dozen movies that understood what you don't, but let's go with Terminator 2 Judgment Day. There's actually a point where they get away from the T-1000 for the longest time, and they actually have some downtime. And John and the T-800 get to bond and whatnot. There's no physical danger for quite a while. And I don't even think there's any real conflict until Sarah panics at the prospect of Judgment Day and decides to try and murder Miles Dyson in a stress-ridden attempt to prevent Skynet from existing. I can also say that the first and third Terminators have this too, where the Terminator Skynet scent is evaded for a while and the characters get to talk about their feelings and all that fun stuff. Okay, let's just get on with it then.
Those kinds of shared experiences are what build strong relationships. Seeing two characters support one another and save each other's lives would do much more for this story than sand speeches and floating fruit ever could.
Too bad you missed the point of both scenes.
Better yet, if you get them to Tatooine right off the bat, you have more time to explore Anakin's character growth.
That's a stupid thing you just said. Both subplots contribute to Anakin's weakness for strong emotional attachments, and this goes straight into the next movie, Revenge of the Sith as well.
Which brings us to the movie's third mistake. Rushed reactions.
You've got some guts to tell me that Anakin's reaction to his mother's death was rushed.
When we're talking about rushing reactions, we're talking about forcing characters to show emotion before it's warranted.
You're not setting a good example so far with your overlays.
Instead of exploring a character and how they feel about a significant event.
Are you fucking kidding me? You could at least try to straw man your point with overlays that don't automatically disprove your point.
The story hurries along to the next plot development. A major problem with Anakin's arc in this movie is that immediately after his mother dies, he wipes out the Tusken Raiders.
Tell me you're joking. The sequence literally starts as a race against the clock, sneaking into the Tusken village, finding his mother, untying her, and they speak for a bit, but his mother tragically dies before sorrow, then anger, then revenge. And this is all brilliantly displayed on screen and through John Williams' haunting score. That tells you, yeah, those sand people are fucking dead, alright?
Now, I'm not saying it's completely unrealistic for someone to react like this, but it does make for weak storytelling.
Heresy!
Why? Because there's no time for his anger to develop. He finds his mom, she dies, and he kills a bunch of people in the span of a couple minutes. That's not enough time to create strong impact.
I don't know what bootleg version of the movie you saw, because in the version that came out in theaters in 2002, they do actually pace this all out, shifting from emotion to emotion in this scene. It is not rushed whatsoever.
And in the end, his mother's death feels like a cheap plot device rather than a powerful moment.
Heresy.
Worse yet, the movie wastes an opportunity to create a compelling dilemma for him. Now imagine this. Let's say Anakin finds his mother and she remains alive long enough for him to take her back to the farm. There, he treats her wounds and tries to save her, but she dies shortly after. Anakin is then devastated and furious. He considers slaughtering the Tusken Raiders and mentions the idea to Padme, who tries to calm him down. That night in bed, Anakin can't sleep because of his anger. He sneaks out to hunt down the Raiders, but Padme stops him. She tells him that's not who he is. He's a Jedi and a good man, and he needs to stay that way. Anakin then faces a dilemma. Should he seek revenge, or should he be the man Padme believes him to be?
Yeah, from what you're describing, this would have fucked over the pacing big time. What the fuck was wrong with the race against the clock sequence, where he tries to find his mother in time, but he arrives too late, but not before getting to speak with his mother for the last time, although obviously not enough time. His reaction turns from sorrow to anger to fury to revenge. That feels more to the point. Also, couldn't it be argued that him going after his mother is literally him giving in to temptation, since he was separated from his mother ever since the Phantom Menace, and part of his training is letting go to his attachment to his mother, but now that he's on his own and without Obi-Wan there, he's easily drawn back in without wisdom or guidance. Wow, I think George put more thought into this than you did, Brandon.
Ultimately, his anger drives him back to the Raider camp. Though desperate for revenge, he finds himself torn between light and dark. He thinks about what Padme said, but then the sun rises, casting red light on the building where his mother had suffered. In that moment, his anger boils over and he murders everyone.
Dude, your rewrite there caused the story and its pacing to go completely off track and would have made the movie an extra 15 minutes longer. A completely unnecessary additional 15 minutes. That sounds like bad pacing to me.
This is a simple fix, and by introducing a dilemma, we create suspense and moral complexity. This gives us time to root for him to make the right choice, and when he doesn't, we feel betrayed and horrified.
Is there something wrong with a character making a split-second decision in the heat of the moment? Why does it have to be like the way you described it always?
Ready for another rushed reaction? Let's jump to the scene where Anakin and Padme discuss his slaughter of the Tusken Raiders.
Oh boy.
I'll give this scene some credit because there's a steady build toward him admitting that he killed everyone.
There was already a steady build in the scene where his mother died, bro.
First, Padme comes in to comfort him, then he laments the fact that he couldn't save his mother, he complains about feeling powerless, and finally, everything boils over as he reveals that he killed a bunch of men, women, and children. This scene isn't terrible, but what is terrible is Padme's reaction to his confession.
To be angry is to be human.
Yet once again, she understands Anakin's pain, and Anakin clearly expresses in confession that he is horrified at what he did. But he was so angry and so hateful that he took it out on the whole village. Everyone but that dirty fucking whore. Jokes aside, Brandon is not assessing this story from Padme's perspective. He hyper-focuses on Anakin, ignores the Phantom Menace, and pretends that Padme shouldn't be understanding. Also, I don't know about you, but I don't think Padme is the type to go, "Oh my god, you fucking monster, how could you have done that?" I also clearly recall that she doesn't say anything out of shock while he's spilling the beans, but then she comforts him. This actually kind of tells us that she stopped and thought about what she would say before she said it, and didn't tick Anakin off even more. That's my 2 cents anyways.
This is just laughable. Remember, she's supposed to be a diplomat, yet here she takes everything in stride after learning that her lover murdered a bunch of people. To be angry is to be human is not the reaction you want here.
Okay, so I should point out that the difference between Anakin's dark deeds in Attack of the Clones versus Revenge of the Sith, and Padme's reaction to it, is that Anakin in Revenge of the Sith has completely reveled in his dark deeds, even offering Padme to overthrow the Emperor and rule the galaxy. But in Attack of the Clones, he clearly expresses that he lost control and that he's surprised he stooped that low. Topped with Padme's initial silence before choosing to understand Anakin's heat of the moment choice, there's a clear contrast. So the next time a prequel hater goes on about how Padme knew that Anakin was capable of killing children via Attack of the Clones, but couldn't believe he'd slay the younglings in Revenge of the Sith, we get to laugh at them because they clearly don't understand these movies whatsoever.
She should react with disgust and horror, and the scene should end on that note. Then, later on, after she's had time to process it and make excuses for him, then she can try to rationalize his actions and forgive him.
Yeah, what I said previously applies. Anakin's remorseful versus uncaring behavior in the two movies.
But what we have here is a reaction that happens so fast, it throws you right out of the story. Ultimately, the core problem with Attack of the Clones is that the romance simply doesn't ring true. It's a shame because there's actually a pretty decent setup here. You have two powerful people feeling trapped by the institutions they serve, and they connect with each other before falling in love. In terms of the big picture, it's not a bad idea, but every step along the way is a stumble, and the romance never hits a natural stride. Whether it's bad dialogue, bad pacing, or bad reactions, these issues hurt the movie from the start, and whenever it has a chance to become interesting, it instead opts to become ridiculous. So I hope this helps.
And finished. Geez, that wasn't much better than last time. This guy really does not understand any of these movies. He's one of those filthy casual channels pivoting off of prequel hate as if it's hip and cool like it was in 2012. Well, it's been 13 years since then. Instead of the end of the world, we have Cordis DA to worry about. Raul Menendez is now the most prolific T-word since Osama bin Laden. Expect David Mason to execute him sometime in June, and we'll all get to see his YouTube video pop up upon his assassination. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying at the Lara's shrine? But oh,